I hope my makeup looks good because, girl, I am snapping.
I know it's been a long time. Let me just preface. It's been a long time. Should have left you with no need to stay too. I will talk about that in another video because it has to do with health reasons. And if I've already made the video, I will link it up here. Hi guys, it is me, Miss MatchaBlossom. I was looking this up with another friend mutually when we were watching a drama, and I was like, I don't know how to. Oh my god. I wonder what they would wear or what it's called, because when you watch dramas or hear about things on TV, usually related to hanfu or online, they always talk about the prettier garments, the garments that people wore, the nobles, to be like more princesses. Kind of like how we talk about like medieval times on the other side of the hemisphere that are more popular over here or just more commonly known. I've just noticed more in online or streaming that people are starting to dress more peasant wear or more of a common wear, just casual wear that you would see commoners or peasants wear in the European or Western side of the world. And I was like, well, what about in hanfu or in ancient times in China? What did they wear? And like, why are we talking about this? It's so commonly known to see these prettier outfits. What about the other people? There are people who do discuss it, but there's not that many. I decided to talk about this video with you all to just break down some facts so we kind of have like our hedgeway into the common people wore as commoners and peasants, because I feel like, you know, it's a good way to kind of segue into like researching. If you want to see more videos like this where I talk about things and explain it and break down, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe. Hit the bell notification to keep you informed when I have a new video. And let's get on to the explanation. Bring sure you got your teas and snacks. So for some of the words, I'm just gonna put as a disclaimer, I am still learning Mandarin, so I'm not really as fluent with some of the pronunciation. So if I cannot pronounce something, I'm gonna put it in a kind of like a title up here, like a little caption, as well as the pronunciations, how it's said in English, or just its original language with how it could be said in English. Once again, I'm learning. I'm not a historian, a teacher, or professor. I'm a hanfu lover who's interested in ancient Chinese history, as well as its culture and its background, because I'm a history nerd. I always have been, always will be. Okay, oh my god, my eyes aren't doing that, I gotta stop. As far as what people wore every day, let's start with farmers and peasants. So when you would have to go out and get your clothes, for them, they would actually have to wear, like a tunic style top, which is called a shan, and would have these drawstring trousers, which is a ku or chu. So you would have these drawstring like trousers, and then you had this tunic style top that would be worn most of the time, because you don't have time to look pretty and you don't have the funds and you don't have the economic value too. So you gotta wear what you can to cover up the goods and keep it moving and try to get your work done, right? They did have drawstring shoes, or they would be more barefoot. Having these shoes were very commonly known, commonly able to wear. Then you would have the straw hats that would kind of block you from shades of like the sun while you're at work, while you're outside in the field. You need something to protect you while you're dealing with all these UV rays, especially when you're out in the sweat and heat, and then whether it's spring or summer. The reason why these materials mattered so much, especially with straw-like clothing or like the tunic materials, it's because most of it was made from hemp, and as you know, hemp and remi were inexpensive and grown very locally, so it was very convenient to get these materials. Not really as much of a hindrance to have this, because it was common, it was close to you, and it was easily woven and threaded into making garments. Mostly common plant and like materials that you can turn into fabric, threads, or garments, because it was very commonly grown by people like either in the village or in the city that were commoners or peasants, especially farmers, because they wanted something that they know like they can homegrown without costing it being so much. For that, they would just go ahead and have it woven for the top and the bottom. Very lightweight and quick drying. It was very homegrown. That's like so easy. It's very much DIY if you ask me. And on top of it, it was very durable for their farm labor. Once again, especially since it was hot outside, and then it being humid. Ugh. If you have everything closest to you, why would you go out the distance to buy more fabrics if you can just grow it yourself and make your own clothing and garments and protective gear? Now, an example of this would be like in the Book of Han with the Emperor Zhao's relief measures, did distribute, or the hemp garments were to be displaced to peasants in the 1st century BCE. And it did show that hemp was a crucial to survival and in daily wear, whether it was winter, summer. Now, layered hemp and coarse silk were available. And the reason why these materials mattered because cotton was a breathable and warm fabric, so it was widely used in the Song and Ming dynasty. But the poor, or the peasant, unfortunately to say it like that, they kind of just layered the hemp that they had just to stimulate that warmth, because it just helped produce like actual body heat. Once again, you just work with what you got because ain't nobody got time for that. For example, the Ming Emperor Hanfu promoted cotton farming to help out to clothe the poor. His edict explicitly encouraged southern regions to grow cotton as a solution for accessible winter clothing. So before then, they were just working with what they got, like what they would wear, because that's what they would wear through different seasons. We're going to move on to a different class, which is more of the merchants. And how interesting that is. Merchants wore this thing called a chongshan. Let me try again. A chongshan. It was a long robe that was basically modeled after the scholars class. So it gave them more of a, I have a little bit of money in my bank account, if you get what I'm saying. So like, let me look more put together. But simple cloth and belts and minimal like decoration were just to kind of show like, hey, I have a bit of money, but I don't got all that. And of course it does depend on the type of merchant you were and what type of like business you've been into for a long time. If you're a new merchant, or if you're old money, new money, you know what I mean? Like that kind of vibe. Or if it was like passed down ancestrally, like from your parents, like to be the next person that runs the merchant business. I don't like how that makes it yellow, but we're trying. So now, merchants did often wear more colorful colors, more than commoners would wear. They would have more simplified stuff, but like very light accents. Once again, for their colors of what they would wear for clothing, they would have more colors like indigo blue, dark green, gray, brown, along those lines, because it still was able to be useful, and they would be more accessible to getting different dyes for their fabrics to be dyed. For example, merchants had a bit of wealth, so they were just like legally restricted by their class that they were in. So they had a little bit of money, but just they were paused on that. Why? Because people didn't really have a lot of respect for merchants, because it was very greedy. Be like, they didn't really respect merchants because sometimes they would be shown as like a sin of greed, essentially. But that's like a whole other topic. Supplementary laws forbade them from wearing any silk, gold, bright hues reserved for just the elite. So even they had limitations. Even though they were able to make a bit more money, they still have limitations on what they were allowed to wear and didn't. For example, according to the Zhu Fanxi from the Song dynasty, the wealthy salt merchants wore more of their dyed indigo cotton robes to stay refined, to avoid the accusations of overstepping their class. So they would wear just certain dyed hues of blues, as I mentioned before, their greens, all that jazz, just so that they don't look like they're being too arrogant. Because once again, merchants weren't, or business folk were not seen in a better light in the class society, which is a whole other video in itself, which I could discuss. Now, winter gear is the next part that we're going into. So before I go further into talking about winter gear, I did have to look up some resources for this because it did depend on class and dynasty. So I hope you can bear with me. I did try to find some physical resources that did describe this, so I hope it can help you visually see everything besides doing your own research. Now, as far as the first winter gear outfit, they did mention, regardless of class, first one I did see was a chu. It was a fur coat. And it's Qiu. Hopefully I'm saying that right, I'm sorry. Was a winter coat that was made from animal fur such as deers, foxes, or sheep. And it did originate right around the Shang or Zhao dynasty period. Was documented in hanfu on the 3rd BCE. Was to wear deer skin or fur coats in the winter. The reason why natural furs were used was because it provided excellent warmth, so it provided a lot of warmth very quickly for people who could accessibly achieve to get it, especially for in the colder, more northern regions. But it was available to commoners, helped them because they did depend on local wildlife, whether it was hemp, orami, or just anything that they could achieve on. So even the poorest couldn't really afford the fur coats, so they would have to go to animal fur. Now the second thing would have to be a straw or rush raincoat, soyi. Now it is a waterproof raincoat that was made from palm, rush, and straw fibers. It did originate back in the Zhao dynasty, did evolve more thoroughly through the Tang and Song dynasty. Why it was used was because it would protect you against the rain and the wind because of its insulation due to that plant fibers that it was created from. Now, ziyi is a paper coat. This one was hard to find any kind of information on, like any art forms or physical documents of any types. So I hope it was a coat that was made from mulberry and rattan bark into a fabric-like layer. Now, it did emerge during the Wei and Jin era of that dynasty, but it did become once again popular between Tang to Song amongst the people in that dynasty for the common folk. Why it was used was because it was very warm, it was cheap, and of course it was repairable. So if it broke, you could just fix it. Oh my god. It was very ideal for the poor farmers and for poor monks. Now, we do have the Mian Yi, which was also another garment that was very hard to locate or resource out, that I could find its physical form. It was a cotton padded jacket. It was a cotton padded jacket that was filled with cotton batting, and it just helped it stay warm and easier for people. So it was very common after the Ming Dynasty to have this. Cotton farming was expanded and boosted by the advocates. Why it was used was because it was obviously superior insulation, so it was a lot more breathable and a lot more cost effective for people who could afford that. And we'll move on to the next part, which is festive wear. Now, for the second part, it's just we're talking about is festive wear. I definitely want to go into like what they would wear for formal occasions, whether you were a commoner, peasant, or a merchant, in that kind of like commoner general physique, class, category, society. I'm sorry, society. Start with the woman first, because ladies first. So women wore a ruchin, as I've mentioned in some of my videos before, which is more of a short jacket just with a long skirt, and that depends on which type of ruchin you're talking about for which dynasty. Let me see if I can pronounce this right. Yujian. The Yujian is a cloud collar that was worn by the elegant and kind of like divine symbolism. So peasants still were able to wear that. It's just, or commoners, excuse me. But they didn't have a fancier version that nobles would wear. They would just have a more very low toned down version. It would go across like in the Ming Dynasty. Now they were able to have decorative hairpins. Theirs would be like more like made out of wood or flowers, for example, or fabrics, because they could not afford like anything that was like from like metals or gold or jade or anything more established, like maybe even copper or bronze. So they would have to work with the environment around them. So that's why a lot of those details look more elaborate. Like they had to just work with what they got. They were really the DIYs for sure. They were like, I'm gonna be a broke on a budget. Really were the Cinderellas of the time, you know, in a sense. We're only wearing these garments like the ruchin and other garments on special occasions, so it's not like they would wear this every day. For example, like weddings, New Year's, festivals, temple prayers as well, like to go do prayers at temples for blessings at the wedding, or pray for one of your siblings to do well at their exam, like to be a scholar, wellness on finding a match for the matchmaker. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes down that line, why they would go to the temple to wear a bit more nicer stuff, because they want to have more blessings and be more respectful. The family, like in other cultures and other like country places, they did reuse these fabrics, just like if you've seen it in European cultures, like how they said, oh, they would sew on and make these new garments like something else from the past that they can catch up with the times. It would be no different for hanfu or any in ancient China. They would go ahead and just reuse these fabrics. They did dye the cotton, and then they would also just stitch it from family scraps. If you were a peasant, you would have some patches here and there. Some of it might look bad, some of it might not. It just depends on like the seamstress in your family, and also depends on your sewing skill if you were to do it. Even if it wasn't like silken or like satin, they would try to find a way to dye it and make it look as beautiful so that they can very much like have what they're obtaining even if they couldn't buy it. There are some colors that were like for formal occasions that they would most commonly wear. Allowed colors they were allowed to wear, some of them you already know the ones they weren't allowed to wear. Based off of class, right? Based off of class. Now red was for weddings and for joy and for luck, so of course you're going to see that at festivals. For blue is more of humility and integrity, and it was a very common color to wear because it means very clean very calming color that people would wear a lot, especially, as I mentioned, among the merchants. Now, green is more for fertility and life, so more earthy tones in my sense of understanding. Brown and gray was more simple and earth colors. I feel like that's more obtainable with most classes that are below certain nobility. Now, the colors, of course, as you know, that were forbidden were yellow, especially bright like yellow. You gonna get yourself like, don't even. And the gold thread and dragon motifs, of course, you're not allowed to. Gotta ging, buddha boo. No. So that was strictly just for the nobility and basically the king, but just mostly nobility. That goes into a whole nother program of a conversation about like what type of dragons, where they were placed for the nobility and royal family, because there was different meanings of how it was placed and where it was placed. Now, some historical example, last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, the one I don't really like to discuss because it's not really hanfu, it's still a dynasty. Their marriage guides had it where red was universally encouraged for the brides to wear, even amongst the poor. It would bring good fortune to that marriage. Here's a historical example. Tang Dynasty, a merchant's wife and Lao Yang was caught wearing a gold yellow scarf, was punished by public shame. Clothing was burned in the marketplace. Now that tells you how serious they were. That would make me not even like the color. Talk about trauma. Oh my god. Basically, this is what the commoners wore. They didn't really have a lot to get and obtain, and there were still limitations for them to wear things like hairstyling wise or even clothing garment wise. They got creative in the time and space that they were in, whether it was summer, spring, or even winter, or in the colder season versus the warmer season. But they did work their ways out, even merchants as well. So with commoners, whether you're a peasant or a farmer or a merchant, you would get creative on what you would wear. They would still be careful about what they would most commonly wear so that it wouldn't get them into trouble. So unless you had a status change, like you moved up a class, you would not be trying. They would find creative ways for you to understand, not to mess around and find out, essentially, without me trying to like curse. What would you do, a peasant or a merchant during this time? What would you wear? And how would you survive? Let me know down below in the comments below, or just let me know, say hi. I miss you guys so much. And thank you for being patient with me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to spread peace, love, and happiness. And it's only up to you to make every day beautiful. I'll see you ladies and gents later. Have a great time. I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Whoosh! Whoosh! Once again, it's cold. You gotta get what you get. Trying to make it work under a budget, you know. It's like ramen noodles before your jacket. Like, you gotta make it work. They didn't have no Dollar Tree, okay? If I do find anything else that's really helpful, I will include it in here as well. Editor Mantra, please help me out, because my notes right here on my phone, it keeps glitching. Who's my mom? Music make you lose control.